know what happened, but it's that time let me in. Okay, here goes. Boy, hope I remember what I was going to say. First of all, I wanted to say we are looking for more people to do Zoom meetings, and I know a lot of you go to other Zoom meetings. If you see another garden meet type of presentation that you think would be appropriate for us, please email info@sdhort.org as much about it as you can, and we can look into that and see if we can, because I get invitations to other ones all the time. Our air conditioning seems to have gone off. Also, if you have any questions, we're going to do them at the end of the meeting. So use the, I forget what it's called, the notification thing at the bottom, and then we'll have Ken read them at the end, and then I'll answer them then. Okay, here we go. So Superbloom 2019. It wasn't just poppies. It's coming back on. Scott turned back on the air. Thank you. At any rate, it wasn't just poppies. What causes Superbloom? So the first thing, I'm going to close the door. Hold on a second. First of all, we need regular rain starting in fall through early spring, and we definitely had that in 2019. We need relatively cool weather without major heat waves. I don't know if you remember 2019, but we didn't have any winter Santa Anas like we get some years. And then what makes it a super bloom is just simply that there's more flowers bloom than usual. And it can be localized or covered a vast area. For example, in 2018, I don't know if you call that year, it was a very dry year, but there were some very unusual rains at the end of the season up at Lake Laguna. And they had a super bloom that was like the only one in all of California because it was brown everywhere that year. But there was some wonderful wildflowers up around the lake there because they had about a week and a half of rain that nobody else seemed to have gotten. Anyway, the total amount of rain can vary, but the most important thing is the frequency of rain, something to keep the ground wet. And then one of the reasons we have such a great super bloom compared to other parts of the country or world is we're in a biodiversity hotspot. In other words, we have more climate zones than just about any other county outside of Hawaii. So we had the variety, of course, of everything from the desert to the mountains to the coast. So that gives us a huge variety of plants and animals that other parts of the country don't have. So over 2019, I visited I counted, I think, 25 different locations just purposely to go see wildflowers. A lot of these are hikes, but some were just to go out and see wildflowers. And this one here, I found out about from a friend online. This is a chocolate lily. It's in Mission Trails Regional Park. There aren't very many of them, and it was a very specific location. And I got there before I'm worried somebody would pick these because they're very unusual, very rare. I'd never seen them before. I knew they existed in San Diego. Anyway, they were on the west side of Mission Trails Regional Park, and this was May 24th, so pretty early in the season. From there, the bloom quickly moved all the way to the eastern part of Anza Borrego Desert. Anza Borrego had some early fall rains that did not, or actually late summer rains, that did not get to the mountains or even the coast at all. And so they had a very, very early super bloom, or it started there very early. And kind of the big three everybody went out there to see was evening primrose, which are the big white ones that get eaten pretty fast. This one everybody loves, desert sand verbena. And then it's not California poppy out there. It's a slightly different species of poppy, and that is Parish's poppy. It's closely related to the California poppy, however. For me, though, this is the one I was looking for. This is Desert 5-spot. It's a little plant that only grows about 5 inches tall, and it's this kind of electric pink with these red dots, and it's very hard to find, and we hunted for 2 days before we found some, and unfortunately it was late in the afternoon, and these flowers are closed in the late afternoon, so we got these nice little round globes without the red. But the next day we found a whole bunch more, and there were quite a few out there in the desert. Anyway, I think this is just one of the most wonderful wildflowers in the desert, but you really have to hunt for it because it's small. Oh, that's nice. Also out there, there's tons of different versions of Facilia. Hope I said that right. My Latin will be really bad because I do all my gardening online, and I've rarely heard these names said. So bear with me if I pronounced them wrong. At any rate, it's desert bluebells. There's quite a few species out here, out in the desert. This one likes to, for some reason, grow at the base of the white granite boulders, and it has these beautiful blue flowers. This is another one a lot of people look for. It's the desert lily. On normal years, there are none some years, and then on a normal year, they're about 4 or 5 inches tall. But in 2019, they were many of them were 18 inches to 2 feet tall, which is just incredible. And they seem to clump together in areas, so you'll get a whole bunch, and then you won't see any for a long ways again in the desert. And they grow right out of sand. It's kind of amazing that this lily grows out there. A little further east in the park, this is in March, there's the sand dunes where the off-roading is, which is kind of a nightmare area in my opinion. I've never been there before, but we went there specifically to see these desert sunflowers, and they're growing right out of the sand with also, if you look there, there's some desert verbena growing there. There were a few other things. Anyway, they span, oops, I don't have the picture in here. They span the whole desert. So as far as you could see, that desert wild sunflower covered the entire desert floor as far as you could see out there on the eastern side. It was quite incredible. The cactus were in bloom, which was a little early in March. I'm not sure why they bloomed early. This one is rather interesting. It's Mammillaria diocese, I don't know, bishop cactus, let's go with that. It's unusual in that it has a very unusual distribution. It grows very well in the desert, and it's pretty easy to find. It's usually in rocky areas. And then it skips the mountains and inland valleys and shows up in, of all places, Torrey pines. And you'll occasionally see it in a few of the valleys over here on the west side of the county. There's a few in Point Loma as well. But anyway, it's kind of an interesting flower where it moves around. And if you hunt around, you can find them growing in really odd places. And this is a giant granite boulder. And here's one that's, it's probably 15 years old, growing straight down the side of a boulder. This isn't rotated or anything. That's the way it was growing. I didn't go see the wildflowers, the poppies that everybody was seeing. It was very, very difficult to get to because of the traffic. Every time I'd go check it, everybody'd say, oh, it's really crowded and you can't park and you got to walk for miles. So anyway, I heard that Rattlesnake Canyon, which I'd never heard of, in Poway had some wonderful poppies in bloom. So we went there on March 3rd, really early. And I had no idea there's this man-made dam there and some waterfalls. And the trails were very poorly marked, and we got lost and couldn't find our way out. But while we were stumbling around in the chaparral, I found the California peony. We have a native peony. A lot of people don't know we have a native peony to California. It's got a very wide distribution over California, and it likes to grow underneath the chaparral. And if you're familiar with peonies at all, these are the right peony parts and the right leaf structure. I have no idea, though, if it has the same number of chromosomes as the ornamental peonies from Asia that everybody grows that we can't grow. But if it does, somebody ought to hybridize those two and get us some peonies we can grow in our gardens in California. Also out there was this little lovely plant hugging the ground. It's a California suncup. One of my favorite spots that I visited almost every year for the last 10 years, except for this year because the trails were closed due to the pandemic, is Iron Mountain in Poway. It's a wonderful park. I forget which peak is Iron Mountain here, but one of these is. And at any rate, it's covered with ceanothus. It burned in either 2007 or 2003. It might have burned in both. And ceanothus is one of the first plants to come back after a burn. And so the whole mountainsides turn blue, usually at the end of February into March. It's about a 3.5 to 4 mile hike to the top, but you don't have to go to the top. This is down at the bottom, and there's tons of ceanothus down there. And it's been enough years, over a decade since it burned, so that you actually go through kind of canyons of ceanothus. Now, also on Iron Mountain is Southern Mountain Misery. This plant has a relative that's fairly well known up in the Sierras, but here in San Diego, we have a cousin of it, very rare. It grows on Iron Mountain, and it's got these lovely white flowers with these very fuzzy leaves. I don't know what it looks like in the summer. I suspect it defoliates. I've never seen it anywhere else. And it doesn't stand out. So if it didn't have leaves, I wouldn't even know it's there. I don't know does anybody see this black line on my screen? I got this black line. I don't know where that came from. Interesting. Also up there is this lovely plant. This plant is well known in the Sierra foothills, but the only place it occurs in San Diego that I'm aware of is on Iron Mountain. And it has these lovely camellia-like leaves that are kind of shiny, and then it has these lovely white flowers that hang down. I don't think it's fragrant, but anyway, it really stands out when you see it. It doesn't bloom for very long. And I know a few people, I've heard of a few people that actually grow this in their garden. I haven't tried it. I've never seen it for sale. But anyway, it's a lovely plant that grows on also up in Iron Mountain. I always like to bring up Scripps Coastal Preserve. A lot of people don't know it's there. Torrey Pines is usually very crowded. Just to the south, though, if you go into an area called La Jolla Farms, it's just the second or first turn. I think it's the first turn. If you leave the university, UCSD, if you leave UCSD, the first right takes you into La Jolla Farms. And just about a half a mile down on the left is Scripps Coastal Preserve. And it has all the views of Torrey Pines without all the people. It has a very level trail. It's very walkable. And it primarily only has, it actually has those cactus I showed earlier, and it also has the coast sparrow cactus, which is another rare one. It's got a lot of Artemisia. And on a good year, it's just covered with these beautiful yellow flowers, of which this is one. This is, it's just got renamed. It used to be Coreopsis maritima. A lot of people are familiar with Coreopsis gigantea, which is from the Channel Islands, but it also grows up in LA, and it's also on our freeway on I-5, which I believe cow transplanted it. But actually, this is our native version of it, a Coreopsis maritima, and it does much better here. It's not very well spread out outside of San Diego County, so it's kind of a rarity. But it's all over the coastal bluffs around Torrey Pines and Black's Beach and everything on a rainy year. And it goes totally dormant in the summer, almost disappears down to nothing. But it has these huge 6-inch yellow daisy flowers that are just quite spectacular and remarkable, especially when they're backlit like you see here. Back over to Mission Trails, also in March. This is our native monkey flower, which I'm sure Mimulus is what I know it as. It got renamed to Diplacus, I guess that is, recently, but I've known it for Mimulus for years. You probably know this plant. It's all over the backside of what's La Jolla Mountain? Anyway, the one in La Jolla on the freeway. You can see it. It's kind of looks rusty up there on the hill. And I have it growing native on my property. There's just one plant that I found that I didn't even know was there after living here 15 years that I found about 5 years ago. I think 6 feet by 6 feet under the chaparral. I didn't know it was even here. Anyway, this is what you usually see is this kind of orangey red color. It's really common. But just beyond the parking on the road there in Mission Trails, there's a pink one. I've never seen a pink one. I took cuttings. They didn't root. And this year I couldn't get back. The trails were closed during the pandemic when it had been in bloom. I'm sure you can get there now, but it wouldn't be in bloom, so it'd be kind of hard to find. But anyway, this pink is really rare. Now, I'm not sure if the pink color stays. And the reason I say that is the one that's in my yard in the winter when it starts blooming is burgundy, like a really dark red. And right now with the heat, it's switched to bright orange, and it's the same plant. I propagated it from cuttings. These are very easy from cuttings. You just cut it and you stick it in the ground during the rainy season, and you'll get quite a few that root. Anyway, so I'm not sure if the pink stays. It could be just the light and the weather conditions of this particular plant that make it pink, and it may only have the genes to be the normal red one. Also in Mission Trails is this lovely clematis. Many people don't know we have 2 species of native clematis in San Diego, and this is one of them. It's also called Virgin Bower and has these beautiful flowers. And these are followed by these big fuzzy seed heads that I think inspired some of the characters in Dr. Seuss. They sure look like Dr. Seuss, the seed heads of them. And actually the native clematis are more known for their seed heads than their flowers, but we were there when they were blooming, and they're quite beautiful in bloom as well. And just to show we did see some California poppies, this is Scott and one little patch there of poppies in Mission Trails. But the day we were there, any open ground at all was totally covered, like hillsides were bright orange and everything. So they kind of went crazy in 2019 there with the poppies. Now, one of the reasons I didn't go out and look at the poppies, this is my home garden. So I've been planting poppies on the hillside for about 4 or 5 years, and somehow they've all ended up at the very bottom of the hill. And they just went crazy in the rain. This is all native plants, except for there was one opium poppy I see there in the middle of it all. And I'll talk about that plant there in a minute. At any rate, they did it again this year. The poppy bloom on the hill this year was almost as good as last year. In fact, they get about 3 feet long in my garden, and they cover everything. So it takes me a couple of days to rip them all out when they're done. Also in our garden is this plant. This is actually not native to San Diego County. It's the Cedros Island verbena. The reason I put it in here, it draws tons of butterflies and moths. It doesn't draw bees for some reason, but the butterflies and moths love it. This is our one of our sphinx moths or hummingbird moths. And these flowers are heavily, heavily scented. The entire lower part of the hill smells when this thing's in bloom. It's a little overwhelming almost, and that's probably why it draws so many butterflies and moths. Very easy plant to grow. They do get big, but they can take summer water. Mine got up to about 3 feet by 4 feet, and we just cut one of them back almost to the ground, and it's coming back again already. So if you give them water, they'll keep going. But they don't need any water. They can go the whole summer without water, and they won't look very good. But they come back, and they bloom again, and they smell absolutely wonderful. So I threw that in there because it's a great home garden plant. Also on our hill, I have the native narrow leaf milkweed. I've only seen this a few times in the wild in San Diego, but it's definitely out there. And this is the one you're supposed to plant for monarchs, not the tropical ones, because this is more in the season with our monarchs. You know, a lot of people are not sure if that's true or not. I have both in the garden. They do tend to eat my tropical one long before they eat this. But this one, about the time it comes out and blooms, the monarch caterpillars show up and they almost always strip it. So right now it has no flowers. I do have some stems left, but I don't have any actual flowers left. I will say though, I have tons of monarchs in the garden this year. I can't believe how many there are. And I'm not really sure why there's so many, because I don't have that much milkweed. So somebody else must have some milkweed nearby. And what talk on California native plants would be complete without Rhamnia coulteri, or the Monolea poppy. This is on my hillside at home. I've got 3 established clumps of it now. You do see it occasionally in the wild in San Diego. I'm always a little suspicious when I see it because it's almost always near a trail, and it's almost always where somebody lived in the last 50 years. So I'm a little suspicious that those are planted. It's not everywhere I would expect it to be, but I have seen it quite a few times hiking in San Diego. And like I said, it's always in an area that had somebody living there at one time. I've never seen it in an area that's untouched chaparral. It's more native to Orange County than here, and that's also my suspicion. One of my favorite hikes in San Diego, which was closed the entire pandemic, and it's now closed because of heat. I definitely would not go out there after even mid-May, is Cedar Creek's Fall Trail. And this is the view at the start of the trail. It goes down and crosses the San Diego River, which runs down here in the valley. You actually have to go through the river 3 times, cross it on foot. So you get to take your shoes off and wade through the river, the mighty San Diego River, to get to the waterfall. Anyway, along the trail was this plant. This is a cherry. We have a native cherry to San Diego, and it is Prunus ilicofolia. It has kind of, ilica means it has leaves like holly. The leaves are a little holly-like. They're not too sharp. This grows also in my garden here in San Diego. I never planted it. I didn't eat one of those again. Did I do that? I didn't even know it was here for the first 10 years. Can I erase those? I did not draw that. At any rate, I didn't even know it was here for the first 10 years I lived here, and I've got quite a few of them. It gets about 30 feet tall, great garden plant, evergreen, shiny leaves. The flowers smell wonderful when it blooms. It's followed by red cherries, and those red cherries are edible, but they're almost entirely pit. They taste like cherries. They're a little bitter, but they're also a little sweet. I don't recommend you can do much with them. Oh, somebody erased the yellow line. I didn't do it. Um, somebody erased the black line now. I don't know who did that or how they did that. Anyway, it's a wonderful garden plant, but it also grows in our native chaparral. It's underused. I have seen it on Mission Bay where the city planted it, and they got big, like to 30 feet, and then they died. And I think the reason is it's in sand, and they water there heavily in the summer, and I think it hates that much water in summer. So if you do plant it in your garden, give it good drainage. Of course, on our garden, it's on a steep hill, so there's no way it doesn't get good drainage. Anyway, this is the waterfall. This video is going to be jumpy on your screen, but I'll play it anyways. This is the largest waterfall in San Diego. It doesn't run all year. It is seasonal. It can run all year, but it doesn't every year. Anyway, it's about a 3-mile hike out to it. And like I said, you get to wade through the San Diego River, which is actually the water coming off this waterfall 3 times to get there. Oops. And then down along the river there was this ceanothus. There's quite a few species of ceanothus native to San Diego. I really am not good at identifying ceanothus, but I think this is tomentosa. Not 100% sure on that. There's only a few plants down there. Not sure this is San Diego County. Eagle Rock is a very popular hike though, and it's up near Warner Springs. And I had heard there were some great wildflowers out there last year, so we went out there to hike it. I'd never actually seen Eagle Rock before. I'd seen pictures of it. I have a feeling that this had a little help. When you kind of get up close to it, you look at it and you think, I think people knocked off some pieces and added some pieces to make it look like an eagle. But anyway, there's this beautiful eagle. This is, if a person were standing here, they'd be about as tall as this rock. So it's quite large. But the hike there, you go through quite a bit of chaparral and oak forest at the beginning of the trail, and you actually hike on the Pacific Crest Trail. So we were there in the morning, and you have quite a few people with backpacks that are doing the Pacific Crest Trail coming at you. But at any rate, in the undergrowth of the oak trees is this lovely plant, which has a somewhat racist name. Needs to get another name, common name. Anyway, Chinese houses, Collinthea. I don't know how to say that. Anyway, and it has these pagoda-like flowers, which is why it's called Chinese houses. Absolutely wonderful flower. This is a very easy one to grow in your gardens if you can keep snails off of it. You can grow it with California poppies. A little hard to find, but once you get it established, I'm told it keeps going. It likes a little bit of shade, which we often have in our gardens. It can also grow in full sun, but it's often happier under the shade of some chaparral or some larger shrubs. And then growing with it was this incredible baby blue eyes, Nemophilia. Usually they're pale blue, but this was just the most incredible royal blue color for a baby blue eyes. I'd never seen one that blue before, though I did see a few more this year and real far away from there, like over 50 miles away. So apparently it's not that abnormal, but I've never seen one that color blue before. This one also you can grow in your garden. I've had a terrible time establishing it. I have a lot of slugs because I have a lot of rocks, and they usually wipe it out. It germinates, but I can't get it up to blooming size before a slug finds it. Another one of my favorite is this one here. This is up at Lake Cuyamaca, but this flower grows in a lot of places across California. Cream cups. I actually hadn't seen one until about 4 years ago, and now I go hunting them out to find them. It is closely related to our native California poppy, but it does like a little bit drier weather and a drier ground and a little bit sunnier, and the flowers are about an inch to an inch and a half across. And then Lake Cuyamaca, I didn't know this was up there. I know this plant, a lot of people know this plant from the Sierras. There's a new black line up here. Anyway, it's meadow foam, and it is this whitest flower you've ever seen. It grows in the damp spots there, probably where there used to be lakes that have dried up, but they still stay wet in the wet season. And the entire valley there, this is Lake Cuyamaca back here in the back, the entire valley there turned white, just a sea of white with these. And this is just one little part of them. I mean, this went on for acres and acres. Never even knew it was here till last year. We also have a native redbud, the western redbud, Cercius occidentalis. It's a little bit weird distribution in San Diego County. This is actually right on Sunrise Highway. You drive right through these when you're heading from Julian up towards Mount Laguna. There's quite a big stand of these, and they bloom incredibly on April 26th, as you see by the date there. There's also a few up on Palomar, and you'll see one here and there, but there are not a lot of them in San Diego. The more common place for this plant is actually Central California on the coast there, and there's quite a few of them. I have one of these in the garden. It's been there about 10 years. It's still only about 4 feet tall, by about 4 feet, but it does bloom profusely. A lot of people complain that it doesn't bloom for them along the coast. I'm not sure why, but it blooms great for me. It also has incredible fall color. It turns bright, bright yellow, and the leaves are evergreen even without much water. They're pretty big leaves for a chaparral plant, which is kind of nice heart-shaped ones. It does have a brief period of dropping its leaves in the winter, though. Another great spot that I think gets very overlooked is Green Valley Falls in Cuyamaca. This is a really accessible set of waterfalls, which we don't get many of in San Diego. In 2019, the campground was closed, and it was closed again this year because of the pandemic. So you had to park quite a ways away to get there, but it was all road to get there, and then you just kind of hike down this little trail and you're on the river. This is actually the Sweetwater River, not the San Diego River, which is kind of interesting because it seems to be bigger to me than the San Diego River, especially up there in the mountains. And it can be a little crowded on a hot day, but we were there on Mother's Day, and that can't be Mother's Day. We must have been there on Labor Day, May 27th. And there was nobody there. Kind of surprised me, though we went back this year and there were quite a few more people, mainly in family groups. Really, it's a series of waterfalls. There's no really one big one, but there's quite a few of these. And while we were hiking through the closed campground, we ran into a bobcat hunting the ground squirrels. The ground squirrels have taken over the campground, and we got pretty close to this guy. It was hunting, and then much to our surprise, we saw, this is the same cat as that one, just a different picture. We saw a second one about 15 minutes later that was bigger. So I was kind of surprised how close they were. I've seen bobcats, you see them fairly often in the chaparral if you're out there a lot, or at least once a year or so you might see one. But anyway, beautiful cat right there in the middle of Cuyamaca. There's a trail that goes up from Green Valley Falls to Green Valley, which is actually the south peak of Mount Cuyamaca. And on there was this lovely owl's clover, not a particularly rare plant. Sometimes you see huge fields of it on rainy years. There's quite a bit out along the San Diego River on that earlier hike. And this plant also is, something beeped in my room. Maybe somebody's trying to get hold of me. I don't know. Anyway, this plant is also pretty common in San Diego. It's golden yarrow. It does go totally deciduous in the summer, but it's everywhere in the chaparral. It's just finishing up blooming now. It's got a very long bloom period. Fairly easy to grow, but you have to be ready to deal with a plant that looks dead for about 6 months out of the year. One of the things that San Diego is known for is its manzanita species. We have a huge number of manzanitas in San Diego. I have a very hard time telling them apart. I mean, I can tell they're different, but I can't ever get the names. But I think I got this one right. I'm not going to try to say it for you, though. But at any rate, it was blooming a little late. A lot of them bloom in the winter. This one's blooming in late May. And it has these lovely, all the manzanitas have these lovely flowers that have this kind of upside down or a vase shape and a lot of pink fur on them, this particular one. Some of them don't do that. And they often have these beautiful red stems, which you see here with peeling bark. And this one had really heavy, waxy leaves. This plant also has a very, very wide distribution, not very hard to find. It is a nightshade family member related to tomatoes. And there's the beep again. Maybe I better check messages. Anyway, it's To see the flower though, you have to kind of pick it up and pull it back a little. And underneath you see this lovely green dots along the center part of the flower with these nice little really dark burgundy or dark purple areas, and then the lovely yellow flower. And this to me looks a little bit like a eggplant flower. Eggplant's a little bit more blue, but anyway, you can definitely tell it's in the nightshade family. This one you find everywhere. I mean, you don't find it in the desert, but you find it all the way from the coast up into the mountains and all over California. There's quite a few other nightshades too, and there's also quite a few non-native nightshades. I have one that I'm trying to eradicate from my own garden that showed up somehow. Another fairly common one are sweet peas. There's quite a few chaparral sweet peas. They grow up in through the chaparral. They look just like our garden sweet peas you grow. Maybe the flowers are a little smaller, just as fragrant. There's quite a few different species, I'm told. I believe I got the name right on this one. I'm not sure. I can't tell them apart. They all look alike to me, but they're round, and they bloom at odd times. I mean, they definitely bloom in the wet part of the year, but you'll see them as early as February, and you'll see them as late as, well, here we are in late May with them blooming, and I think we saw some a couple weeks ago blooming in June. We also have a native honeysuckle, which most people don't know. It is, however, a chaparral bush. It is evergreen. It's fairly easy to grow. I've got one in the garden that's a little slow. They get about 6 feet by 6 feet. It doesn't have a heavy fragrance like other honeysuckles, but it's definitely in the same family. And I have a picture of a different one in a different place coming up. Get a close-up on the flowers. Another one that's pretty common is Western wallflower. This plant has a huge distribution. I've seen it all the way up into Wyoming. Sometimes they're a little bit more orange than this. It's mainly in our mountains here. This is up in Cuyamaca. It's kind of scattered around. It's occasionally you'll see a few clumped together, but you usually just see one here and one there. Another monkey flower. This is Cleveland's monkey flower. It's a really interesting one. It's got this nice yellow. This is native primarily to San Diego County, so you can't see it anywhere else. It likes slightly wetter and shady areas and some of the other chaparral, but it's not one that has to grow in a boggy area, because we also have some of those as well. So we have mimulus that grow, well, it's got the new name, but they used to be mimulus. Mimulus grow from are just everywhere in the chaparral, kind of a dry one, to there's some that grow only in heavy, heavy wet areas, and then there's ones like this that grow in in-between areas. This is one of our coolest wildflowers, in my opinion. Very hard to get a photograph of, though I finally got one here. This is only about 1 inch across. The problem is the plant's kind of fuzzy looking, and it just doesn't photograph well. But it has, if you touch its foliage, it reminds me of juicy fruit gum, maybe, or sweet. It's got a lovely fragrance to its foliage. It's a fire follower. I'm sure a lot of you have tried this in the garden and killed it. I've got 2 plants now. One, I had a 3rd one that just died, and I had a 4th one that died a few years ago. Very hard to keep this going. It really, really is touchy about summer water, but if you let it totally dry out, you're going to lose it too. Though when I see it growing hiking, it's growing in usually really wet or dry spots. It doesn't seem to care. But so don't know what the secret is. Another one that's pretty much everywhere is checker bloom. You'll see this anywhere you hike. It's in the mallow family. Pink wands, they're usually about 1 foot or 2 long. They close up when the sun isn't out. Tons of lupins all over the county. This is grape soda lupin, which got its name because it supposedly smells like grape soda, though I don't quite get it when I'm near it. And this is this year. This is up on Sunrise Highway. It seems to bloom really reliably along Sunrise Highway in May, and there's huge stands of this. And it's one of these flowers that picks up the purple really nicely, the sunlight. It just glows. When you're driving by in a car, you can see this from quite a ways away, and it's pretty easy to find because it's right on the side of the road. It's in most of the clear cuts. And then behind it here is a white ceanothus that isn't quite open yet. This is Garnet Peak. It's a little north of Mount Laguna. It's still in the Laguna Mountains, however, but it also is right over the desert. The backside of the mountain drops about 4,000 feet straight into the desert, so it's quite a dramatic hike, though you don't get real near the drop-off. And it looks like a garden setting up there. This is blue whorls that we were talking about that's hard to photograph. This is it here in the foreground. It just doesn't make a good, you know, it's a nice purple color, but it's hard to get a picture of that. And then this is buckwheat, California buckwheat, which is kind of everywhere in our hills. And then this is gallium, which is bed straw. Usually you know it for the annual one that's a weed, but we have a couple different species that are native here to San Diego that are chaparral shrubs. And it does stick to you, just like the other galliums. If you get near it, it's got like Velcro. Not too bad, doesn't break off on you, but it does kind of grab you. And it has a interesting smell, not real great. But after it does this green, this is its bloom, it's the lime green. After that, it's followed by white fuzzy little flowers, which are seed pods. So it has some pretty long interest, and it's still going strong in my garden. In fact, it's just now starting to bloom, so it won't even have its seeds out until August. And I've never seen it for sale. It just happens to be on our hillside. And this is, I'm sure everybody recognizes this. There's tons of buckwheats all over San Diego and California in general, and all the mountains. This is the native California buckwheat, always spectacular. It comes up when it first starts blooming with these cream flowers. These are gonna fade to a rust eventually and make some nice fall color. There's a lot of erigerons, or asters is what I call them. I can't tell you which one this is. They're usually single plants with just a few flowers on them, but they're everywhere. Another one that's pretty well dispersed is California thistle. There's a few non-native thistles. This is actually the native one. I've got a little better picture coming up. And then I'm going to talk about this plant in a minute. This is chamise. Chamise is kind of a fire follower also, and it likes it dry. And it's not a very exciting plant, but in 2019, it turned the mountains white, or kind of it's going to be lime green. I got a longer picture of it, a picture further away. I've never seen it bloom like that. I mean, it was just incredible. And this is also Garnet Peak still, and you can see you're right over the desert here. This is probably Borrego out here, and that's probably Santa Rosa Mountain. Also up there is the bush poppy. This is one a lot of people grow in their gardens. It has these beautiful yellow poppy-like flowers and seed pods. It's pretty easy to grow in your garden. It does get big, but the one most people grow isn't the one from our mountains. They usually grow the one from the Channel Islands. It gets about 6 feet by 6 feet. Looks a little bad towards the end of the fall season, but the minute it rains, it sends out huge gray kind of glaucous leaves and starts blooming again. It blooms for about 9 months out of the year. Good background shrub. It does not like summer water though. I've killed it by giving it regular irrigation. It does like spotty irrigation. It does some water, but you don't want to get it too wet in the summer. This is back to the chamise. So this pale yellow here is all chamise blooming. This is buckwheat again, California buckwheat. And this is the pullout. If you go up I-8 and you turn left on Sunrise Highway, there's a pullout about a mile after some switchbacks where you can stop. And we stopped there, I don't know why. And we're standing there and we hear like chainsaws. And we're not sure what the chainsaws are, or some kind of buzzing noise. And we hear it coming from over here on the mountain. Anyway, and it keeps getting louder and louder and coming up closer to us, and finally comes through the valley here, and the noise goes around us and passes us. Anyway, it was cicadas. I had no idea we had a native cicada to San Diego. I know them from the East Coast. If any of you live back there, you know them from the summer. This one sounds a little different. But anyway, I guess when one triggers, it triggers the one next to it, and they all start going. Anyway, we had several rounds of that coming through the valley here and going on. And it was so loud, I couldn't believe it. Anyway, kind of cool. And again, the chamise, this hill had all burned in 2007 or 2003. I'm not sure which fire it burned. And chamise is a fire follower. And so it's come back heavily and it's totally covered the mountains again. And this must be some wetter area down here at the bottom because these are huge oak trees. Again, a close-up of the chamise. One of my favorite flowers, this is in the same pullout. So this is growing basically in the hill strip between the Sunrise Highway and a parking lot. There were tons and tons of Calochortus weedii, or Mariposa lilies. And Weed is actually named after a man who this is named after. His last name was Weed. It's not because it's weedy. Weedy eye is someone's name. It is my favorite wildflower. It blooms on these naked stems, and it's got quite a wide spread. And here were just different ones, just right there in that pullout. But we were headed that day to the Laguna Mountains, and here we are clear out in June, and to the lakes. And we barely got hiking at all, and we found another Mariposa lily. And I believe this one is in, I have my glasses on, in Venetus, at any rate. And it has quite a few variations in color, because just a few feet away were this one, which is more pink. And they have these lovely purple pollen sacs in here. And these are just some of the different varieties that were growing. These were everywhere. Now, we went out and hiked there in May again. Everything's a little earlier this year because of the not as much rain, and there weren't any. And they were everywhere in 2019. There were none at all in 2020. Close up again of the California thistle. This is, it's a big draw for beetles. As you can see, there's almost always some kind of pollinators in there crawling around. And the light hits this and it just really glows. It's a little hard to pick it up with the camera, but quite an incredible flower. We also have some native violets, which I was not aware of until a few years ago. I've seen these in Mission Trails and a few other places. They get smaller flowers and dry years. This year, the flowers are barely ½ an inch across, but last year these look like when you grow in your garden, about an inch and an inch and a half across. Growing under, they like to grow under the pine trees up near Lake Laguna for some reason. Golden Fields. Golden Fields is a little better known in Central California, but it does show up here, and we don't usually pay much attention to it. But this is what you get, is this huge swaths of gold. There's quite a bit of it up on Mount Laguna. These are the pine trees that are native up there behind it. Clarkias, there's quite a few species of Clarkias. They grow wild. They're usually got pretty small flowers. Again, this one has larger flowers on rainy years, though this one was still pretty small. And I love the name on this one, rhomboidea, which means rhombus. And if you draw the lines, you see you have a rhombus-shaped flower. And then this year, I saw this one over in Horse Thief Canyon, and I throw it in here even though it wasn't 2020 or 2019, but it was just incredible. I mean, what a great color combo. Who dreamt that up? And then back up at Lake Laguna, a third Mariposa lily grows up there, and this one is concolor, and it always has bees and bugs in it and has the little hairs, but it's, if you notice, it's not quite as tawny colored and as rugged around the edge as the earlier one I showed. And growing near there is a very widely distributed Opuntia. This is a cold hardy Opuntia. It can grow where it snows. It covers a lot of the inner mountains across California and into the western states. And it has this beautiful yellow flower. It matches the previous flower. Lots of lupins up there. We have several native delphiniums. This is parashite, I believe. Looks like something you grow in your garden. And then this was the cover photo I used for the email, but this is Iris missouriensis. Missouriensis, you kind of like, where's that? Why is that name there? Well, it was found, is known growing on the headwaters of the Missouri River in the Rocky Mountains, but it shows up in Lake Cuyamaca for some reason. It's also a few places in the Sierras. Anyway, it is a true iris, and grows. The Missouriensis is growing on the eastern side of the Rockies, but here we are on the western side, and it grows quite well up there, and it grows in the swampy areas along the lake. I believe this is Brodiea. I never know how to say that. Quite a few species of these. I can't tell you which one. They all look alike. It's a little bulb. I've tried to grow them many times, never been successful, but they're up there. Another Clarkia. This one's all over the place, covers the whole West California. Wine cups. These are about ½ an inch across. This burgundy sticks out everywhere. Hard to miss this. It's not a spectacular flower in that it's big, but you sure do see them everywhere when you're hiking. One of my favorites to the Laguna Mountains, which kind of the hot spot of the world for this plant. I didn't know that. It's also called snow in summer or smoothleaf linianthus. It is everywhere in Cuyamaca and Laguna back in June. It looks like snow on the hillsides. It grows under the pines. It's everywhere in the campground. You'll see it all over under the pines up in Mount Laguna too. And these are a nice white clumping flower. I used to think it was phlox, but it's not even related to phlox. So we do have a mountain phlox though as well that looks a lot like it. Vulcan Mountain, here we are clear out of July 4th. You know, we had rain off and on all year, so there were still flowers up there. Found another Mariposa lily. This one's got a more pink color to it. And a close-up here of one of them with these beautiful blue pollen sacs. And this one was growing just a few feet away. Kind of amazing they can grow so close together and be different species. This is concolor again. What I went up there though for was the cream cups. There was a huge fields of these up towards the top of Vulcan Mountain. And along the way, there was a few penstemons. This again is one of those that picks up the light and really, really glows in the light. It's a little hard to pick it up in the photo with the kind of a purple and a blue. And also up there, this time they're open. My earlier pictures, they weren't open. This is the native honeysuckle, and you can kind of tell if you're familiar with honeysuckle what the flowers look like here. And then this flower was everywhere on Vulcan Mountain and on Lake Laguna Mountain last year, just fields and fields of golden star. It's a bulb. Didn't see any this year, not sure why. However, we went hiking in March along Sweetwater River, the lower part there near Nahamul, and they were everywhere down there along the trail and mainly in disturbed soil. So they're still around. I don't sure why it shows up some places and not others for on different years. This is a little past bloom, but you get a whole like a array of these yellow flowers when you see it. And we did see a few later in the season up on Mount Laguna this year. This is fringed spine flower. It's very, very low, only about 3 inches tall, and this is a really zoomed in picture. The flowers are barely the size of your fingernail, but it makes these huge hot pink mats. And you can actually see them on I-8 when you're driving on I-8. If you look up underneath the chaparral there as you get into the mountains, and they're all the way up to the rest stop up there, off and on, these huge pink mats, and it's this plant, pink spine flower. I don't know anything about growing or anything. I don't even know what the leaves look like. It just covers itself with flowers late in the season, and it's this beautiful hot pink. This is, I used to think they were dandelions. Turns out they're not. And this is, I believe, the bloom, but it's very hard to tell. The seeds look almost identical. This is kind of a fiber optics thing. The light, when it hits it, which is nearly impossible to pick up with a camera, it refracts. And this thing just glows. When you see it from a few feet away, you just see this really, really bright white light with the way it picks up the sun. And whatever you do, I'm told, is do not Google this common name. You'll be really sorry. Also on Vulcan Mountain, but this is all over the Cuyamacas, is a red penstemon. These are made for hummingbirds. These long tubes are about the same length of a hummingbird tongue. Hummingbirds are obviously the main pollinator, and it's rare you see them without some hummingbirds nearby, red being their favorite color. Back over at Lake Cuyamaca in July 4th still, there's a very large milkweed. This is Indian milkweed, its common name. Gets about 3 feet tall. This flower head's about the size of a grapefruit, quite spectacular. It likes it a little damp. And growing with them is the lesser Indian paintbrush. However, even though it's called lesser because the flowers are smaller, but the plant is taller. These are about 1.5 feet tall. And again, it grows in marshy areas. Didn't know this plant existed until last year. And I've seen it several times this year now that I know about it. Also, for some reason, on the road from Julian to Lake Cuyamaca last year, there were fields and fields on the right-hand side across from the lake of these delphiniums. Amazing how many there were. Didn't see any this year. Just spectacular. I mean, this is something you would easily grow in your garden. Back to my home garden. This is Yucca whipplei, and the reason I use mine, because I never bother to take pictures when I'm hiking, but they're everywhere. This plant has a very wide distribution over Southern California, and there's some that grow all the way up into the Southern Sierras, but they're pretty common in San Diego. I mean, it's like an indicator species of our chaparral. And this is one I had bloom in 2019. I grew it from seed that I took from one that was alongside the road up on Mount Palomar probably 15 years ago. So a very long wait for this bloom stalk, and it's going to bloom. It's going to die afterwards. It's Hespero yucca whippuli. It used to be yucca whippuli, and they renamed it a few years ago because it's slightly different than a yucca in that it dies after blooming. I had a second one bloom this year. And this is why you grow it. It has these incredible flowers. You get about a month and a half show out of this. And it, like all yuccas, has a very odd pollination thing. It doesn't draw many insects because of it. There's a specific wasp that pollinates yuccas, and it comes in here and it puts a hole in the side of the ovary, or the side of the flower where the ovaries are, and it deposits pollen from the flower in there and then lays eggs. And that's about the only way to pollinate these, because the ovary is totally sealed off. At any rate, I was surprised that my two plants that bloomed both set seed, which tells me the yucca moth is somewhere in the western part of the county, because there aren't very many of these around here that I'm aware of. We're going to jump up to Torrey Pines. Torrey Pines was still going strong in July. This is actually the northern edition. This is the part of Torrey Pines back here in the background that you're familiar with along the beach, but many people don't know there's also a northern section. Both of these are still closed due to the pandemic, kind of sad, but you get Torrey Pines and chaparral and some beautiful scenery and very few people and some very rugged trails. The trails are not very well marked, but you can go walking around in all these woods back here. And there was a reason we're there, and I'll be there. I'll show you a picture in a minute. But this is a typical scene of Torrey Pines. This is a native Opuntia, a really beautiful one. This is deerweed, kind of common everywhere, and nobody pays much attention to it, but it does bloom nicely. It's obviously in the pea family. If you look at the flowers, you can see that. And this is another yucca. This is Shindigari, I think. I'm not quite, Mojave yucca is a common name. And it's another weird one. This plant is everywhere in the Mojave Desert. It's all over in the rock place outside of LA, of Palm Springs, Joshua Tree. It's everywhere there. You see it all over the Mojave Desert. It skips all the way from there to Torrey Pines, shows up again. Very strange distribution for a plant that can take high desert heat and then also very, very cool conditions. Very slow plant. It blooms reliably every year, though, once you get them going. Probably most of us won't be around to see them bloom if you plant one in your yard, though, because they take 15 to 20 years to bloom. Pretty flower. I didn't label it. I don't know what. I know it's a bluebell, but I don't know which one. Shouldn't have put that in there. Back at Torrey Pines, this is very common, western blue-eyed grass. This is everywhere, and it grows on my property here. We never planted it. It comes up all over the place. I see it hiking everywhere. It's in the lily family. It's got 6 petals, as you can see. Very easy to grow, great garden plant. Can go totally dormant in the summer if you don't water it. If you keep it watered, it stays green, not very spectacular, nice background plant, but it does bloom for about a month and a half to 2 months in the gardens. And I just found out recently that there's ones that look just about like it all the way across the southern part of the United States. I had no idea there were different species of it, but the flowers look identical. The only difference is they're more adapted to more water. Several nurseries sell it. They have bred some shorter varieties. The problem with it is it gets about 1.5 to 2 feet tall, and if it gets any irrigation or rain, it tends to fall over. But that's partly how it propagates, I think, because when it falls over, you usually get a bunch at the base of it where it fell over. Also, I noticed over the years, these little pieces here of green that are around the flowers, if you snip that off, you'll see the little root line, little roots already growing in there, and you can stick that in the ground and get more plants. So it's a pretty easy one to grow. It's almost like a walking iris if you know how to propagate those. Another great one, this is also spread all the way from the coast to the mountains. Really beautiful hot pink flowers. Very low, only about 3 inches tall. The flowers are under 1 inch, but they're very profuse. I threw this in here. This is, a lot of people grow this in their garden. It's a very easy garden plant, the California bush sunflower. It's pretty much restricted to San Diego County, which most people don't know. Caltrans is using it though. It's all over the freeways of late. They seem to be putting it in almost any restoration they do. Southern Pink or Celine Lacunata. This you see pretty often. It's a plant here and a plant there. Interesting about the word pink, it isn't because of the pink color, it's because the leaves of the flowers, and this particular species doesn't show it as much, look like somebody took pinking shears and cut the edges. So that's where it gets its common name, is from the edges of the flowers. Very bright scarlet red, a hummingbird feeder. We also have a native snapdragon. This is actually a bush snapdragon. It's can be perennial. I found it growing on my hill, which surprised me. I didn't know I had it. I propagated it from cuttings. I had a ton of them last year. This year I only have one. But the place I noticed it the most is in Torrey Pines. When you're walking up the slope there on the road, it's all over on the right side this time of year. And there's tons of them up there. Very easy to grow. And as you can tell, it's a snapdragon. If you pull down that lower lip, it'll snap right back, just like snapdragon. Also up there, which more known in the Cleveland Mountains, is Salvia clevelandii. Obviously, the name is named after Cleveland, which also Cleveland National Forest picks up his name. This is only native to San Diego. This is the one that people grow for the fragrance of the leaves. It's very fragrant. Blue Dix, I'm not going to try to say the botanic name. I never get it right. These are everywhere. They especially like to come up after burns, but they're there in open areas other years. Last year, though, they grew these big flower heads. Usually you get ones like this with just 1 or 2 flowers, but last year they were just masses and masses of these with big flower heads. And this year they're back to being, you know, a flower here and there. It's a bulb, and you can actually try to grow it in your garden, but I've not had any luck for it. Anyway, this is the reason we went to the Torrey Pines Annex in July. Ken Blackford, who's a Hort member, had posted some pictures on Facebook, and I saw those, and I was like, oh my God, I got to go see these. This is Delphinium cardinalis. In other words, a red delphinium. And as you can see, it is cardinal color. And these bushes get about 6 feet tall, and they bloom with no leaves. And they were everywhere up there on the northern annex of Torrey Pines last year. Just masses and masses of them, taller than us. Mixed in, my favorite wildflower again, Calichortus weedii. Calichortus weedii. I got a bunch of pictures of them here. It's my favorite. I love these little hairs. I guess they're to keep the insects in there longer. I'm not sure, because they don't have anything to do with the pollination that I can see. And then December, out at Cabrillo National Monument, they planted agave shy eyes in the parking strip. And I'm not really sure why they did that, but they're there, and they bloomed. This plant is very interesting. It's everywhere in Baja, just south of us on the coastal bluffs, and along, if you go the road down the past Rosarita, they're everywhere. There's only a few stands of it in San Diego. There's some in Torrey Pines, and there's some out at Cabrillo Monument. You see them here and there. There was a huge stand at the border, but it got bulldozed. It was quite controversial back in the 80s or 90s, I believe that was, when they widened the border wall. They took out the largest stand in the United States, which was there. And there's some suspicion that the ones in Torrey Pines and Cabrillo were planted. It's a little hard to know because they could grow there. It's certainly the right conditions. Very easy garden plant. The other thing interesting about agave shy eye is it's the parent. It was crossed with agave attenuata, which is a tropical agave, the softleaf agave or the foxtail agave. And one of the offsprings is agave blue glow. And I bet a lot of you grow agave blue glow in your garden. And this is one of the parent plants. Interesting, the agave blue glow doesn't look like either parent. I mean, if you put the three together, you would never guess that that's the offspring of a softleaf agave. And this one has very rigid leaves with quite a few spines. And it's a nice small rosette. Anyway, this bloom stalk's about 8 to 10 feet tall. We'll come back to it in a minute. I'm going to jump into 2020, and the reason is there were a few wildflowers I've been hunting for, and I found them, and so I'm kind of excited about them. This is one of them. This is climbing milkweed. This is in Torrey Pines. I never set foot in Torrey Pines until 2010. It's one of my favorite hiking spots when there aren't people, and there's always people these days. But I started hiking in 2010. I used to bike ride through it. I used to be a pretty avid bike rider. Probably bike rode up the road inside there over 1,000 times, but I never got off the bike and hiked it until 2010. At any rate, so I was so amazed at all the wildflowers. And I saw this flower in March of 2010 in Torrey Pines, and I've never seen it again until this year. And it's still growing on the same trail in the same place. And I've gone to look for it many years, and here it was back on March 9th. Anyway, it's a milkweed relative, and it has these absolutely wonderful flowers. This is a little bigger than they are in real life. They're about an inch across, I would say, and it kind of climbs up the chaparral and has all these flowers all over. Another one I knew about, this is Western Azalea. I've seen them up in Northern California. This has a very wide distribution, goes all the way up into the redwoods. I'd always heard they were in San Diego, but I was suspicious they really grew here. At any rate, on June 18th, Scott and I were up hiking Palomar Mountain up, I think it's Doan Creek by Doan Pond. And there they were. They're about 8 feet tall. Some are shorter, some are taller. And ours are all white. They're usually kind of pink, but the ones up on Mount Palomar were white. And this is a true azalea, a rhododendron occidentale, sorry. And I don't know if, I imagine we can grow this. I don't know anybody who does. Probably needs water. And then also up at Palomar at the fire lookout, I knew about this plant. I saw it in a relative of it in Wyoming 2 years ago, and they were just incredible. And I knew it grew in our mountains, but usually it blooms. June is a little hot for me to be out hiking, especially inland. But it was a cool day. We went there, and there they were between the parking lot and the road, of all places, what had been disturbed soil, growing underneath the fire lookout on Mount Palomar Mountain. Incredible flowers, these 4-petaled, kind of square with all these wonderful dots and bizarre flower parts. And it seemed to draw mainly bees. And then another one, I see this every now and then, but they usually don't look so good. But just 2 weeks ago, the Los Penasquitos Preserve, we walked through there. A lot of non-native plants, but also a lot of native plants. There's a huge stand there of California wild roses. And these were about 2.5 to 3 inches across, baby pink. I mean, who wouldn't want to grow that in their garden? I couldn't believe how great they looked. I thought maybe I ought to go take some cuttings and see if I can get this propagated. It wasn't a kind of damp area, but that's fine for a garden. And hardly anything eating the leaves like our hybrid roses we try to grow. And totally unattended and covered with pink flowers. What's better? What could be better than that? Another one I didn't know about. I knew we had several native heliotropes, but I had never seen this one before. I thought it must have been a weed or an introduced species, but I came back and looked it up, and sure enough, it's native to San Diego. Don't want to try to say that, but it was fragrant. It smells like heliotrope, and it was dry as can be there, and this thing was just leafy and green and looked happy as can be. So finally, I want to give some resources. My favorite place for looking up plants and plant names of California is calflora.org. It's a website. And then secondarily is calscape.org. And the cool thing about both of those is they show locations. They don't tell you much about how to grow the plants, but they have pictures, and you can search and find them. And that's where I get most of my plant names from. I start on there. If I can't find it there, I post on the California Native Plant Society Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, I recommend you join this. Wonderful wildflowers all over California. You can't believe how diverse the wildflowers are in California. And usually if you post a flower on there and say, I don't know the name, you get the name often in less than 30 seconds. There's so many people in California on there. And they often know stories to go with your plant, which is kind of amazing to me. Sometimes they take a little longer, and sometimes nobody ever gets the name, but usually I can post stuff on there that, I mean, the ones I just showed you, I posted all 3 of those, and people gave me names almost immediately, and they go, that's such and such, and I was like, I've never even seen it before, and somebody knows the name. In the winter, borregowildflowers.com is a good source. They also have an app you can download. I use the app because it's really good for flower identification. And one of the unknown things, you're thinking this might all be desert flowers. Well, Anza borrego sneaks up to the backside of the mountains and it touches Mount Laguna, almost at the peak of Mount Laguna. And because of that, borregowildflowers.com has tons of the mountain wildflowers on it too. So this is another good source. You can search on there by color and they have a lot of pictures. It also has an app you can download so that you can use it when you're away from your phone, which you often are when you're hiking, you don't have any cellular. So you can still identify some flowers while you're hiking. My hiking ideas, a lot of them come from San Diego Hiking Society Facebook page. People will post a hike on there and they'll post usually a flower or two. And if you look at it a while and you know a little bit about wildflowers, you go, that's really rare. And then we'll go out and try to do the same hike and find the wildflowers. So this comes in real handy for me. For actually finding the hikes though, I like to use hikesdcounty.org. It is a free site. And it has maps. It tells you what time of year to go. It tells you what time of year not to go because it's too hot. And very, very useful site. I would recommend, we've mistakenly done this a few times, download the map before you go. And the reason is when you're out there, you often don't have cellular. And when you don't have cellular, you don't have a map. And that's happened to us a couple of times recently. And we're kind of like, we're not really sure where we are, but maybe we'll be able to get back. So I highly recommend that. And then finally, back over to the shy eye here. This is a hummingbird. There were hummingbirds all over it that day in December. I love that all the tourists are walking by and ignoring it totally. And here we are in the parking lot, Scott and I taking pictures of these. Finally, a few people joined us, but most people totally ignored it. And I think this is gonna be jerky on your monitors, but on mine it's very smooth. This little hummingbird, and it'll recycle. So Ken, if you're still there.
I am.
Are there questions? Can I see them here? I can.
So I think we got to stop your sharing.
Oh, I have to do that.
I think you have to do that.
I did it.
Right. And then, so what we can do is go to gallery. So if you want to ask a question, the best thing to do is just unmute and ask your question.
Do my question. Hi. I have a question.
Okay.
I am asking for a friend, not for me, but they were asking me, they were out on a hike and said, I saw these amazing wildflowers. Can I collect their seed or propagate, get slips or anything like that? Is that illegal? No.
My understanding is that if it is on state property, which is most of these hikes on here, or city property, it is illegal. However, I'm also told, Jennifer, maybe you know more than I know on this, I'm also told that if they're on the side of a road or they're on private property, especially if you have permission, you can collect.
Okay.
And I don't know how many of you know Edward Pilanowski, or I don't know how to say his last name. He collects wildflower seeds all over the place. And he has one of the most incredible small wildflower gardens in La Mesa, I believe it is. And he's collected all of these unbelievable wildflowers. And people ask him that a lot. And that's the reason I know the answer, because they're like, you shouldn't be picking those or whatever. You're definitely not supposed to pick the flowers in any case, which some people do.
Yeah. At least in Mission Trails where I work, we ask people not to take anything from the park.
Well, that was pretty much my answer to my friend was, oh, I don't think you better. And,
like Torrey Pines is totally illegal to do it in, and people do it all the time, and it's really sad. Right. The rule on national parks and most parks is you aren't to take anything. And I always am amazed because if you go down the beach, people take the shells and all kinds of stuff. And I'm not sure if it's legal anywhere, but it's certainly not legal when you're on a state beach. Right. And I'm always surprised. People go out at low tide. I didn't know this until we had the super low tide a couple of years ago. And we were out there on Christmas Day, and all these people were out there and they were collecting. And I was like talking to them. I said, that's illegal. And they said, we're picking up glass. They pick up that beach glass. Right. And that turns out is legal. I didn't know. They told me it was legal anyways because they use it in artwork.
Oh,
Broken glass, not native, you know, it shouldn't be there, but it gets all this soft edges when it's bounced in the surf for years. So anyway.
right.
There are a lot of great native plant nurseries, though, in Southern California. I mean, in San Diego County, and then also Tree of Life. They have a lot of interesting, rare things too.
Right.
Okay, so we got
Okay.
Karen's hand up. So Karen, please ask your question. So if you want to put your hand up, that's a good way also to, you know, to ask if you can figure out how to put your hand up. So you got to Karen, you have to unmute first. This is going to go on forever.
Is it me, Karen, that has the hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Oh.
But I just want to say that this is the second time I've seen this presentation of Jim's, and it is by far the most inspiring thing I've ever seen twice now. That was unbelievable, Jim.
Thank you, Karen.
Unbelievable. I want to take all those hikes and I want all those plants. And I do have a comment about the Rosa californica, the
Yeah.
native Rosa california. I have it growing here in my yard. It's off camera here. It is very invasive once it finds water. And so in a small garden, it can be very thorny and spiny and it makes a thicket. So it might not. It's beautiful, and the hips are really tasty. The rose hips are really good for you. But anyway, so there.
I do see it for sale at, what's the place in South County? It's got a new name. It used to be Recon. Hi, Scott. Why did you pick up? Did you raise your hand?
No, I was going to ask you, who was your driver for all these hikes, Chip?
Well, it was you and your Tesla, so we didn't burn any fossil fuels.
Jim, I think the name is Native West. Is that Native West Nursery? Is that what you're
Yeah, I think that's its new name. They do sell the wild rose occasionally. They also have, the thing I like about Native West is they grow plants for repopulation for Caltrans, or at least they used to. And they mainly grow things that are native to San Diego County. They have a few things that aren't. And the problem I've had in establishing wildflowers, especially ceanothus, is many were bred in Northern and Central California, and they hate it here. I mean, I can't keep those alive. But they sell our native white ceanothus that grows right here on the coast. And I've got 4 of them in the garden. They're slow, but I don't water them at all, and they get big. And I haven't killed one yet. And I've killed the other ones almost every time I try them. So I like that they sell stuff that's native to San Diego. The other thing they do that I like that not everybody agrees with, but they tend to grow things in clay soil, which a lot of us have clay soil. So when you put them in your garden, they don't have this huge shock. And there's another nursery who I won't mention, but they grow theirs in really loose organic soil. And that loose soil with all that organic material, when I put it in my clay soil, the clay just sucks the water away, and I can't ever get it to rehydrate. And somebody said I need to knock the soil off and replace it with my clay soil, but it's too much work. I just have much less success with their stuff than I do the things that come from Native West, or whatever the new name is. Anyway, any other questions? I think we're done.
Yeah, Jim,
Oh, hi.
I could not see the seed head that you mentioned, and there was one plant that you said, the clematis. Do you have the seed head to show? In your slide, it didn't show the seed head.
No, I never, because you know what? They show up about this time of year, and I don't hike this time of year. It's too hot. I see them occasionally on the side of the road when I'm driving, but you know, I don't have a picture of them.
Okay, because you mentioned, and I kept looking, I said, I cannot see it. So
you know where they grow? I don't know where you live now, but they are everywhere in San Elijo Lagoon.
Okay.
And if you hike there, that's a short trail. They used to be all over when you hike in from the Solana Beach side on the right-hand side of the chaparral. That used to be covered with them.
Okay.
And, they're huge vines. I mean, they cover the entire chaparral, and there used to be tons of seed heads there.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to see it. But if you Google it, you'll find them too. Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, so we've been at this for an hour and a half, so I think probably some people want to go to dinner. So
Yeah, me too. I didn't know I talked that long. I thought I'd be 40 minutes.
at our high point, we had 86 people. So that's pretty good for our first attempt. And sorry for a little, as I said, this is our shakedown cruise, and we expected a little difficulty, but it wasn't too bad. And we will endeavor to have another meeting in August, but the first assignment is we're going to have to find a speaker. But so if anybody has, Jim mentioned, anybody has contacts or ideas, please contact Jim or myself or Jason, and we will get on it. And so thank you all for attending. Also, I've recorded this entire event. We're going to figure out how to deal with that recording. So that might take a few days to figure it out. But so if you want to go back and review some of Jim's slides, hopefully they will be available and you can have a closer inspection of those. So again, thank you very much for attending. And it's fun to be back as a group. It's not as much fun as over at CBI, but it's still fun. And Jim's talk, as was mentioned, was quite amazing. He's quite an amazing guy, and we're all honored to be associated with him and able to call him our friend. So with that, I will say goodnight, and I'll hang everybody up, okay?
Thank you. Don't forget, turn off recording.
I won't. Yep. Well, that'll happen when I end anyways, but I'll turn it off right now.